Okay, so here's the roadmap, the structure for this lecture. First, I'm going to talk about economic cost. I kind of hinted about this in the recap slide, but what it means to have the true cost, the true economic cost of a decision that you make. Okay, and we'll contrast that with explicit cost, which is just the dollars that you pay for something. Okay, economic costs. Spoiler: economic cost includes opportunity cost. Okay. Then we'll talk about production possibilities frontiers. This is basically a way of mapping graphically how to produce two goods in a combination that's most efficient. And it could be more than two goods, but for the sake of these lectures, we're just going to restrain it to two goods, because otherwise we'll have a three-dimensional graph, and that's not fun. Then we'll talk about feasible, infeasible, efficient, and inefficient allocations, and this goes back to the production possibility frontier, and you can see it directly on that. Then I'll walk through an example, and this will probably be the bulk of the lecture, going through an example of production possibilities and trade. So the trade example will be when I start talking about the Marshall and Kendrick cars versus songs production pattern, and that'll be the bulk of the lecture. But basically, how do these two individuals produce effectively? How does this change when you introduce the aspects of trade, where one person producing two goods can then trade with another person producing two goods? What happens to their production patterns? What's the most effective way to produce? And then I'll introduce some vocabulary along with that. So the example will touch on this next bullet point, the cost and benefits of trading with each other. And then finally, I'll talk about the law of comparative advantage. And in the meantime, I'll define what comparative advantage and its counterpart absolute advantage really mean, and why they're important, and how they help you analyze and predict trade patterns, and hopefully how you think about trade patterns in an international context, in this in the real world, how you think about them using terms like comparative advantage, because it really does matter in the world outside of this lecture.